the doctors told you so far? What are you diagnosed with?
I have an undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcoma that started in my arm and metastasized through my main artery into my lungs. And I now have 25 tumors in my lungs.
And barring a miracle, how many months have the doctors given you?
One oncologist said 3 months. A sarcoma specialist in Denver said he would think 5.
And before this diagnosis, what were you spending your life doing?
I was a missionary in Turkey with my wife and 5 kids, helping with a church plant and publishing books by God's grace.
And if by God's grace you're healed, what will you spend the rest of your life doing?
God willing, we'll be right back in Turkey unless they won't let us in.
How much work is left to do in Turkey?
Bitmez, buiş, bitmez. There's no end to the work. There is very, very few faithful Turkish men and probably just as few faithful missionaries. And so there's a lot of work to do.
What kind of people should go to the mission field?
I think there are different kinds of missionaries. Of course, you have people that can help the poor and the sick and things like that. But I think the main thrust of missions is to build Christ's church, to share his gospel and to see his church grow. And I think because of that, we follow the scriptural model that we see with Paul sending out Timothy and Paul sending out Titus, or leaving them, I guess you could say. So the kind of men I want to see is elder qualified men who hold to the doctrines of grace, which the scriptures teach, that believe in the local church, in church discipline, biblical preaching of the word, the biblical practice and administration of the ordinances, and basically faithful men that are qualified. And so basically, if you're not a qualified elder here, if you're not willing to serve, or if your church hasn't qualified you to serve here in America, then don't you dare go to Turkey, please.
So you're living in what could be the most churched city in the world, and there are many elders. What would you say to the many elders that could go? You obviously can't because of the cancer. But what charge would you give people who are weighing in the balance whether they should go or not?
I think if you, by God's grace, believe that you have been qualified as an elder, and if you believe that your local church is sufficiently taken care of, then I believe you should consider going to another country, to another people group that doesn't have biblical churches, doesn't have a gospel witness. And I think rather than just only praying about it, you should definitely pray about it. But you got to have resolve. You got to make a decision in your heart to go somewhere. And then you got to pray for strength and resolve to not give up. Because it's really easy for people to question God's calling when things get hard, and to search for other giftings or ministries when things don't go how you want them to go. And so we need people with resolve who are dedicated to give their lives to a language, a people group, we need people that learn Turkish or Arabic or whatever language it is, and that are willing to stay until they die or something inhibits them, where God just closes the door for them. That's what I'd say.
So you've met quite a few missionaries over the years. What do you think needs to change? What are things you've been grieved about with the state of missions today?
The things in missions that grieve me are almost too many to list. Of course, all the unqualified people grieve me. The people with false doctrine grieve me. But it's really sad that most missionaries don't even believe in the local church. They also over-contextualize the gospel to where there is no gospel. They are willing to let go of biblical commands and say that they're contextualizing. And that stuff is grievous, and God hates it. And so that bothers me. Another abuse is financial abuse, and it's really easy for missionaries to make a lot of money, because a lot of God's people a lot of Americans are very rich, first of all, and the ones that love the Lord are very generous, and they will give to people not knowing if those people are doing good work. And so people abuse money and misuse it, take way too much, and do nothing. Another thing that really bothers me is people, just because they're in a country that's scary and there's a danger in sharing the gospel, many of them don't share the gospel. And they find other ways to do ministry. And that is a tragedy, I think. You shouldn't go to a country where it's scary to share the gospel if you're not going to do it at all. You can be careful, I understand. Don't be a fool. Getting a megaphone in Saudi Arabia and going in front of a mosque, it will be your last, I'm sure. And I wouldn't say you definitely shouldn't do that, but probably a bad idea. But never sharing the gospel until you know someone for 2 or 3 years is ridiculous. You can't live in fear like that. You should share the gospel with as many people as you can. And if bad things happen to you because you're sharing the gospel, then bad things happen because you were being obedient. And that is not something to be ashamed of.
What are you encouraged by missions?
Like, what things in missions encourage me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm encouraged to see, God's always got his remnant. And just like here in America, where most of the churches and most of the ministry is fluff and just noise, the same is true for missions. But God has his remnant. And just like he has a beautiful bride here in America, even though sometimes she's hard to find, it's the same with mission work. It's not the guy in the video that is looking, walking you around Istanbul, showing you all the stuff and telling great stories. It's probably not him that's getting most of the real work done. It's probably the guy that doesn't want to be in a video and that just wants to see Turkish men and women come to Jesus and doesn't want a name for himself. but just wants to exalt the king. That's the guy getting stuff done, and by God's grace. And I've seen some men like that. They're rare though. But it's a beautiful thing when you see it. And I know God will always keep his remnant, and he'll keep his work going. And the gates of hell will not prevail.
What charge or encouragement would you give to missionaries that feel like giving up? They've been there for years and are questioning their calling or thinking of coming back because of a lack of fruit.
Well, if they're questioning their calling just because of a lack of fruit, then if that alone is their reason, then they should remember Noah, who faithfully preached, and yet no one came. Fruit is not the determination of a fruitful ministry. But I think it's good to reevaluate our lives, and it's different if they're asking, am I qualified? Did I come out here to do this with bad motives? That's a different question. And maybe they should go home. Or maybe they came out with bad motives, but God has changed their heart so much that now they should stay. And they should repent of their original bad motives and change their ministry and their lives and try to honor him with what they're doing. But seeking fruit, I think, is always dangerous. I think seeking God's glory through obeying what he says to do and the way he says to do it is the way we can know if our ministry is really being faithful or not. Are we preaching the word? Are we honoring him with how we live and talk? And if we are, then leave the consequences to him, leave the fruit to him, and go a little bit easier on ourselves.
Any last words in regards to missions?
I think I'd like to see a lot more people do it, to go. What I think is really frustrating is that the people that shouldn't be going to missions are the ones that don't even think if they're qualified or not, and so they just do it. And then the people that should be going to missions are thinking, I'm probably not qualified, but they probably actually are qualified, but they're just so scrupulous that they don't do it. And so there needs to be, what we need is, like almost every famous missionary or even theologian or reformer, they always had someone, a friend, who was goading them to do stuff. And so I think we need more pastors and friends goading each other to be missionaries if we think our brother's qualified. Just pressing them into it if we think they're gifted for it. I think that's something we need.